Jesus journeys to the Jordan River from Nazareth to be baptized by John the Baptist. In Mark's gospel, there is no dialogue between Jesus and John. We really don't even know for sure that John knew who it was he was baptizing. When Jesus is baptized by John, as he is coming up out of the water, Jesus has a vision. The heavens are torn apart. In Matthew and Luke, it just says the heavens are opened. So Mark describes this scene in a much more abrupt and dramatic way compared to Matthew and Luke. The Spirit descends upon him like a dove. A voice from heaven speaks to Jesus, telling him that he is God's Son, the Beloved, and God is well pleased with him. It doesn't say that anybody else heard this voice, so this seems to be a personal spiritual experience that Jesus is having with God at his baptism. Wind in Hebrew is ruach, which is the word in Hebrew for spirit. In our first reading from Genesis, it says the Spirit of God swept over the waters. So Mark is telling us that the same Spirit that swept over the waters during the beginning of creation is now resting upon Jesus, who is himself the beginning of a new creation. And Mark begins his gospel by saying that this is the beginning of the good news. Just as God's voice names all of what is to be created and pronounces it good, God's voice names who Jesus is and says that he is good. Our baptisms, like Jesus' baptisms, give us an identity. They tell us who we are. We are beloved children of God. Baptism is an initiation into the universal Christian church. It is a rite of passage along with confirmation. In our baptismal liturgy, and in many ancient baptismal liturgies, the parents are asked, by what name do you give this child? Baptism gives the child an identity, tells them who they are. Now, in today's world, there are a lot of marketers and advertisers that would like to tell you who you are so they can sell you a product. Nowhere is this more true than with teenagers. They know that the need for social belonging, which is part of forming an identity, can influence a person, especially a teenager. If you buy this new iPhone, you'll have all of these new friends, and you look very cool with all of your electronic devices. As we grow up, we are all on a journey of figuring out who we are and why we're here. I believe that this is why ancestry research is so popular, especially Ancestry.com. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. It's popular because we want to know where it is that we come from. My aunt works at a lab company that makes those well-known DNA spit tests where you spit into a cup, it goes out to a lab, and then it comes back and it gives you all the percentages of what's in your DNA. Like it might say, 50% Europe West or 8% Ireland. My cousin took the test, and his results came back showing that he was part Neanderthal. This morning, I brought the Lent. This is my family's ancestry book that my Aunt Betty put together that she researched, and it traces the Lent family all the way from Germany and how they immigrated from Germany to Ellis Island here, and then eventually immigrated out to be farmers in Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Illinois. If you'd like to take a look at it, it'll be in the fellowship hall after the service. She did a really good job of putting together this ancestry book. Retired United Methodist pastor Martin Thielen shares a story told by the late Fred Craddock on his website, Doubters Parish. Fred Craddock was a beloved Disciples of Christ minister and professor of preaching in New Testament. He's one of my favorite preachers from my own tradition because I was ordained in the Disciples of Christ. And this is the story that he tells. Many years ago, on a trip through Tennessee, Fred stopped at a restaurant. As he drank a cup of coffee and ate a piece of pie, he met an older man. When the elderly gentleman found out that Craddock was a preacher, he told him the following story from his childhood. The old man told Craddock that he had been born and raised in a little village near that restaurant. He had a single mother, and they were very poor. He was what they called back then an illegitimate child, a child born out of wedlock. When his mother and he came into town on Saturday, they were shunned by all the good people in town. They wouldn't let their kids play with him, and some of them walked on the other side of the street when they saw his mother and him coming. He had many fights with boys at school over the names they called him and the bad things that they said about his mother. They had a little church in that village. The boy went to it sometimes. He would sneak in after the service started and slip out before the benediction so he would not have to face the church people and feel their disapproval. One day, a new pastor came to the church to check him out. To check him out, the boy slipped into the back seat halfway through the service, and he liked his sermon. The pastor was young and talked so the boy could understand him. But then the new pastor pulled a fast one on the boy. After the sermon, he walked to the back of the church, announced that he wanted to meet everyone present, and then pronounced the benediction. The boy was trapped. He waited until the church was empty, hunkered down in the corner, hoping that the pastor would not notice him, but he did. The new preacher walked over to him, thrust out his hand, and said, "Glad to see you, boy, and tell me, who is your daddy?" The boy turned red and dropped his head. The preacher didn't know the details, but he knew he had asked the wrong question. The pastor took the boy by the chin, pulled up his face, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Oh, you don't need to tell me. I already know. I see the family resemblance. You are a child of God." The boy's name was Ben Hooper, and he went on to become the governor of the state of Tennessee. Before I moved to Cedar Rapids, I met with a clergy friend of mine who came out to me as being gender fluid, which means that you identify at times as both male and female. He told me that he was planning on getting his name changed, and he asked me if I would join him at the courthouse with some other supporters from his church. I told him that I would and that I fully supported him. That day when we were at the courthouse watching the judge approve his name change, all of us got up from our seats and cheered. We took a group picture outside in the hallway of the courthouse. I went with him to the clerk's office where his name change paperwork was finalized. We hugged, and he expressed to me that I was like a brother to him. We went back to his church with other members from his church, and we ate a meal together, celebrating his new identity. When we were baptized, we too were named as beloved children of God. And when that identity is affirmed by a community, we are then empowered to fully live into that identity. Amen.